It started on a quiet road outside Dawson, Georgia. Late afternoon light faded through the trees, the air thick and still. On the shoulder of that red dirt road, someone found a wheelchair tipped onto its side. The front wheel was still turning. No sign of struggle, no sound. Just a silence that didn't make sense. Within hours, word spread. A 12-year-old girl had vanished. Her name was Victoria Lily Anderson. Lily was bright, gentle, and known by almost everyone in town. 2 years earlier, a car crash left her paralyzed from the waist down. But she refused pity. She kept writing stories, winning small contests, dreaming of one day becoming a journalist. Her mother, Martha, worked night shifts at the local clinic. Across the street lived Harold Bennett, a widowed neighbor who often helped push Lily's chair up the sidewalk or brought cookies during the holidays. That Thursday afternoon, Lily left school around 3:30. She wheeled herself to the same bus stop she used every day, 2 kilometers from home. The weather was warm, the road damp after a morning rain. When the bus arrived, the driver didn't see her. He waited, honked once, and pulled away. An hour later, her mother texted. No reply. By 8 p.m., worry turned to panic. At 9, police were notified. Volunteers gathered with flashlights and dogs combing the wooded area near the stop. By 11, an officer spotted something metallic under the streetlight near an abandoned park. It was Lily's wheelchair. The seat was dry, as if she had left it hours before. A small blue scarf with her initials, VLA, rested on the armrest. There were no footprints, no tire tracks, nothing to show where she went. The town froze. Dawson was the kind of place where everyone waved to each other at gas stations. Now people whispered instead. The next morning, news trucks lined the street. Reporters said Lily's disappearance had shaken the heart of Georgia. At the local church, candles burned all night. Martha sat with a photo of her daughter staring at the door as if waiting for it. The road where it was found grew over with weeds. The bus still passed each morning, slowing for a stop no one used anymore. Lily never stood on her own, but in Dawson, Georgia, it seemed someone made sure she disappeared without leaving a trace. If you want to know what came next, the suspects, the false accusations, and how a secret waited 15 years to surface, stay with us for part 2. And tell us, what do you think really happened to Lily Anderson? She was the face everyone in Willow Creek remembered. Yearbook photo, 1982. Bright eyes, steady smile, shoulders squared like she knew where she was going. Friends said the same line over and over. Vanessa wasn't just pretty. She showed up for people. She covered pep rallies when others bailed, stayed late to stack chairs after assemblies, and learned teachers' first names because respect mattered to her. A small-town paper once ran a feature with a headline people still quote, "Prom queen who stayed kind." Before she vanished, Vanessa Cole made life in a town of 9,400 feel bigger, not smaller. That was her place in Willow Creek. Home was 204 Maple Drive, a 2-story wood house with a front porch and a thin line of wildflowers she planted herself. She lived there with her father, Frank Cole, a plumber who took emergency calls at odd hours and ate late dinners at the kitchen table with a radio humming in the corner. After the separation, her mother, Diane, moved to a nearby town, but kept a standing Sunday call. Vanessa kept both lines open. If her mother missed a weekend, Vanessa called on Monday. If her father worked past 10, she left a plate in the fridge and a note under the salt shaker. Neighbors remember seeing her bike glide down Maple Drive on quiet Sunday mornings, stopping at Main Street Flowers to help open the shop before church traffic rolled through the square. People described her the same way: on time, neat, polite without being stiff. She ran the morning announcements at Willow Creek High, read the pep rally script without stumbling, and still made a point to say thank you to the custodian who set up the mic. At Main Street in 1982, Vanessa was a first-year student at East Borough College, studying communications. She commuted between campus and Willow Creek, class during the week and shop shifts on weekends. A professor later said she had drive without arrogance, curious, prepared, and not afraid to start at the bottom. She applied for a summer internship at the local radio station and spent evenings tinkering with a tape recorder she borrowed from school. "Radio is the sound of honesty," she told a classmate, meaning it's harder to hide when all you have is your voice. She planned to apply to a larger university the next year. The forms were already circled in a catalog she kept in her desk drawer. Her closest friends were Kelly Myers and Tina Delgado, both from student committee. The on-again, off-again boyfriend was Jake Mallory, 2 years older, from the same high school class that crowned her prom queen. They split a few weeks before the 1982 dance. The reason depends on who you ask. One friend said Jake wanted to move faster than she did. Another said the distance between campus and town wore them out. The only fact that stuck was simple. They were on civil terms when he asked her to attend prom for old time's sake. At first she said no. Then she said yes because she didn't want drama. In 1982, people thought that choice showed maturity. Years later, it became a line in a police file that kept circling back to the same name. The week before May 2nd looked normal. Vanessa went to class, clocked in at the flower shop, and checked in on her father's late shifts. She met a teacher to borrow a sample graduation gown for a photo idea. She bought flats instead of heels because she did not want to trip on the floor during slow dances. On Friday, she called her mother and said not to worry. She planned to be home early after the dance. Frank remembers her pausing in the doorway before bed and saying, "I'll leave the porch light on, just in case." No debt. No warning signs. No sudden changes in friends or routine. Life moved at the same pace it always had. In a town like Willow Creek, people remember different things about the night itself. Memory is like that, especially after 4 decades of retelling. One friend swears Vanessa looked worn out when the music slowed around 10. Another insists she was glowing, clear-eyed, and steady. A boy from the stage crew says she told him she needed to call her mother and stepped away. He never saw her again. Those small conflicts would later complicate everything: timestamps, witness lists, and the order of events. But on one point, everyone agreed. Vanessa was not someone who disappeared to make a point or start over. She left notes. She called home. She showed up. Her place in the town did not fade after 1982. New classes still walk past her photo in the hallway at Willow Creek High. Teachers tell the story each spring, not as a warning to scare students, but to remind them that attention and care are part of this place. Parents tell freshmen what it felt like to wake up the next morning and learn she had not come home. The tradition stuck. On prom day, someone says her name during setup. They check the lights in the parking lot. They ask if the back door latches correctly. That routine is part memory, part ritual, and part promise that this time adults will watch the spaces between the party and the car. At Maple Drive, the room stayed the way she left it. Dress folded in the closet, radio on the sill. The crown from that night, cheap plastic and rhinestones that catch dust, gets cleaned once a year. Frank does it with a towel and glass cleaner, not because the crown is valuable, but because it's the last object that says PROM without footnotes. It is the exact kind of thing people keep when they don't have answers. He never stopped paying the power bill on time. He never moved. He waited for the doorbell for years. If you map the life of Vanessa Cole before that night, the lines are straight. Home, school, work, church, Main Street, and back again. The point of this portrait isn't to turn her into a symbol. It's to show the routine that defined her and the community that formed around it. A father who trusted her judgment. When people say the case haunted Willow Creek until 2023, they mean it never stopped being personal. Names from this story are not just lines in a file. They're in church directories, class reunions, and homecoming photos. For decades, the town replayed the same questions. Did someone follow her? Did someone know she always called her mother before heading home? Did anyone outside her circle learn her habits? That is why it stayed alive in people's minds. Not because of mystery alone, but because a real life with ordinary patterns was interrupted on a night full of witnesses, cameras, and routine. This is who Vanessa was before the disappearance took over the narrative. A student, a daughter, a co-worker, a friend, a steady voice on the morning PA. She made small choices that built trust, and that trust tied her to a town that never forgot her name. Understanding that is not background. It's the baseline for what comes next. It frames the questions that matter. Where she went after stepping outside. Who had access to the spaces behind the hall. And why the early timeline failed to produce a clear path home. May 2nd, 1982. Vanessa Cole arrived at Willow Creek Hall at 6:30 p.m. with two friends, Kelly and Tina. They parked her light blue Pontiac in the back lot, third row, near a failing lamp. Inside, the dance moved like every other small-town prom. Photos, laughter, routines everyone knew by heart. Between 7 and 8, the crown went on her head. The VHS later used for yearbook dates it to the slow song that played just before 8. No alcohol for her. Friends would say she stayed clear, steady, and on time. By 9:15 she had changed into flats. That mattered later. Witnesses agreed she wasn't leaving scuff marks on the floor and wasn't slipping away for long stretches. She took congratulations from teachers, circled the room with friends, and kept to the main hall where the camera still ran. Nothing in those hours hints at a plan to disappear. At 12:10, she pushed through the back door. A maintenance camera above that door existed, but the tape would later be declared corrupted by poor storage. We're left with what people saw. One boy from the stage crew, doing a late sweep, noticed a flash of a light dress moving toward the lot. He couldn't swear it was Vanessa. He didn't try to follow. At 12:15, two separate students reported seeing a young woman near the metal handrail by the third row, the same row where the Pontiac sat, under a sickly, flickering sodium lamp. They didn't approach. They didn't hear distress. They didn't see another person. When police took statements, the descriptions drifted. Was the dress white or pale blue? Was her hair pinned or down? The settings stayed constant. That rail, that row, that bad light. Between 12:20 and 12:40, the timeline goes quiet. No one recalls an engine starting. No one heard doors slam. No camera covered the exact band of asphalt where the Pontiac stood. No security guard's name appears on the roster for that slot, though someone should have been assigned. The car remained locked. The keys were never found. That detail would matter for decades. If she had the keys, why weren't they with her? If someone else had them, when did they take them? Inside the hall, the music shifted down by 12:45 and faded by 12:55 as teachers started clearing the floor. Friends assumed Vanessa had headed out early to avoid the rush at the door. Kelly and Tina checked the bathroom, then the lobby. At 1 o'clock, Tina circled the hall and the coat racks and felt the first hard doubt. By 1:10, they agreed they couldn't reach her and that something was wrong. The habit that anchored the family, call home late, tell Dad you're on the way, had already been missed. The first call to police came in at 1:25. Patrol units reached the back lot between 1:40 and 2:10 a.m. They found the Pontiac locked, windows up. A small amount of cash remained in her wallet in the console. On the handrail near row 3, an officer collected a single brown hair. It was sealed and initialed. On the pavement, there was a partial shoe imprint. The corrupted backdoor tape sat on a shelf in the evidence room without climate control. Storage notes show a fan, not a dehumidifier. By the time a specialist viewed it, warping had ruined most of the movement frames. The wall phone log was never matched to a receiving record at Diane's house or at Maple Drive in the first pass. The manual nature of the school's log meant someone had to physically compare timestamps against home bills. That comparison didn't happen for weeks. When it did, both homes showed ordinary calls on nearby days, not that night. The bar receipt stamped 12:07 a.m. could have anchored or dismantled Jake's timeline if police had mapped travel time precisely and pulled payphone or register logs from the route. They didn't. Interviewers asked broad questions and accepted around midnight as an answer because it sounded close enough. The difference between 11:55 and 12:10 is the difference between a clean exit and a collision with the crucial window. That 15 minutes remained blurry. The backlot roster should have listed a guard. Instead, a torn page covered midnight to half past. Supervisors later called it an accident. It meant no one could confirm who was on foot patrol when the lights flickered most. No one logged whether a flashlight swept row 3. No one wrote down if a man in a jacket cut across to Route 9. Decades later, when the name Hank Monroe emerged, those gaps looked like invitations. Witnesses, meanwhile, compared memories in the days after, contaminating their own accounts. One student remembered a white dress only after a friend suggested it. Another adjusted the time of his last smoke break to fit what he thought police wanted to hear. By the time sworn statements were typed, the cleanest recollections had already been touched by hallway talk. That was preventable. Officers could have isolated core witnesses before they left the building. They didn't. The scene work in the lot was careful but incomplete. Cones went up, the hair was sealed, the shoe print was photographed. But a broader canvas search for keys in drains, bushes, and the fence line didn't happen until daylight, and even then with a smaller crew than needed. When a teacher asked if floodlights could be brought to code. Across those first hours, one truth stands out. Investigators had a narrow window, 12:20 to 12:40, when the routine broke and the records went thin. That is where the case lived. that is also where it was allowed to loosen. The town wanted answers fast. The police wanted a person to press. The school wanted quiet. Each tug cost the timeline a minute here, a connection there. "We thought she went home," a teacher said years later. "We didn't understand we were already in the hour that mattered." By dawn, the Pontiac was still, the handrail hair was bagged, and the name Vanessa Cole had entered a radio script it would occupy for decades. The report read like a checklist: call received, lot checked, item collected, witnesses interviewed. But the checklist hides the lost chances, the corrupted tape that was never stabilized early, the phone log never matched in time, the torn guard roster, the lights no one charted. Those were the golden points. They were missed. This is what happened and how it happened. A straight evening turned into an empty 20 minutes behind a public building with bad lighting and bad records. Why it ended tragically would take 41 years to learn. But the seeds of delay were planted that night. 3 suspects would soon fill the town's conversations. None could answer the quiet between 12:20 and 12:40. That gap and the choices made around it carried the case into a cold room. The week the case broke, the investigation fell into a pattern that felt safe. Police framed the search around people the town already knew. Relationships first, strangers later. It was fast, it was familiar, and it steered the story toward 3 names: Jake Mallory, Pastor Alan Riggs, and Eddie E. Kramer. Each came with an easy headline: an ex-boyfriend, a moral authority with public disagreements, and a rough man who ran a lot next to the hall. None of them brought the one thing the case needed most: a clean bridge through the 20-minute gap outside Willow. The first name on everyone's tongue was Jake Mallory, 21, the former boyfriend. They had broken up weeks before prom. Friends described the split as civil but tense. "He still had feelings," one said, and everybody knew. Police called him in on Monday morning, May 3rd. They asked when he left the hall, where he went, and who saw him go. He said he left before 11 to meet friends and showed a bar receipt stamped 12:07 a.m. That created a simple, dangerous shape. A gap. At least 60 minutes of time where a watchful officer should insist on minutes, not ranges. Jake argued he drove straight across town. He said the receipt time reflected slow service and a sloppy register. 2 friends backed him, but cameras in the bar's front entrance didn't lock in their arrival. They were on tape later, not at the door at midnight. It could have been a normal delay, it could have been nothing. But the gap overlapped the backlot window, 12:10 to 12:25. When witnesses placed Vanessa near the metal handrail under a flickering lamp. That overlap kept his name alive. In the first days, witnesses had remembered a calm hallway exchange around 10:40 p.m. No shouting, a quick parting. By midweek, a new voice came forward with a sharper version. He claimed he'd passed near the band room doors closer to 11 and heard raised voices that sounded like the pair. His words were short but vivid. "You made me look like an idiot," a male voice said. "Get out of my face," a female voice answered. A second student, asked later, recalled something similar but changed the wording to jerk and loser after talking to classmates. Nothing on tape captured it. Nothing in the records fixed it to the minute. Still it spread. The argument, real or retold, gave shape to motive in a town that already wanted one. When questioned again, Jake denied any heated scene and repeated his timeline. He called the rumor garbage. He said they had agreed to talk another time. He admitted to being upset about the breakup, not violent. Police logged the second interview and released him. They did not immediately cross-check the drive time from the hall to the second name, Pastor Alan Riggs, sat in a different corner of the community. He was a strict, visible presence. Sermons on personal conduct, student programs with curfews, public comments about what should and shouldn't be said over the school mic. He and Vanessa had disagreed earlier in the year about pep rally content and the tone of morning announcements. Parents lined up behind him or against him. There wasn't much middle ground. Police brought him in around lunchtime on May 3rd. He said he spent the night at home drafting a sermon. His wife confirmed. No independent witness saw him between 11 p.m. and 12:30 a.m. There were no calls out of the parsonage that night, and no camera covering his street. The rumor that someone spotted his car near Route 9 never landed in an official report, and no photo ever surfaced. Riggs kept his answers tight and his public statements even tighter. He asked people to pray for the family and declined interviews. The town split, as towns do. One side said he was a bully with a Bible, more than capable of confrontation. The other said he'd given 30 years to Willow Creek and deserved trust. In the file, he lived between those perceptions. Possible motive from conflict, limited opportunity, zero physical link. He stayed on the list because that's what happens when timestamps are soft and alibis come from inside a house. Eddie E. Kramer was the third name. He ran a lot near the hall and had a reputation for losing his temper after a few drinks. He claimed he stepped out to smoke around 12:20 a.m. near the front gate and didn't see anything unusual. There was no camera at the gate. The logbook that should have covered the backlot patrol between midnight and 12:30 was torn. The missing page looked like a clumsy accident. It functioned like a trapdoor. His proximity, the timing of his smoke break, and the broken paper trail put him in the lane of suspicion. He got defensive when police asked about the flickering lights. He had no DNA linking him to the scene, no hair or fiber that matched the handrail find. His name lived on corners where impatience meets convenience. Alibis stayed loose. Jake had a receipt with a stubborn stamp and friends with sliding recollections. Riggs had a spouse, not a stranger, to vouch for his presence. Eddie had his own word and a torn page. None of them had a binding proof. None of them carried a physical piece of Vanessa's last known space. The collective weakness should have pushed the investigation back toward the scene and the systems around it. Instead, it pushed the town into the familiar comfort of character studies. Who seemed angrier? Who preached harder? Who swore more? None of that reaches the metal rail. Pressure made the detective room hotter. At the church, members closed ranks and spoke up for Riggs. At the bar, old fights bubbled back into story and turned into a chorus about Jake's temper. At school, the paper ran updates with timelines that were part fact, part speculation. The radio station in the next county lifted quotes and treated them as verified. The family kept calm, pointed back to the 11:30 wall phone call, and reminded anyone who would listen that Vanessa called home when she stayed out late. A quiet ask in a loud week didn't carry far. Then came the mistakes that matter. Police didn't separate key witnesses on prom night and take sworn statements before students swapped memories. By the time some kids wrote down what they'd seen, they'd already compared details in the parking lot and the hallway. The backdoor camera tape, stored without climate control, melted into a smear where the frames should have been. The third-row lane around the Pontiac wasn't closed with floodlights until morning. If the keys hit the ground that night, they had 12 hours to vanish into gravel, grass, or a janitor's truck. The maintenance log for the parking lot lights, which documented intermittent outages that month, wasn't pulled until long after rumors hardened. That one sheet could have taught investigators how long those dark intervals were, and when they usually fell. It could have turned a guess into a clock. Red herrings piled up, as they always do. Someone claimed they heard a scream outside at 12:30. The music inside was still loud at that minute, and no independent witness matched the claim. Someone swore they saw the pastor's car on Route 9 with its lights off. No one took a plate number or wrote a report. Someone suggested Eddie had a master key to student vehicles. The lot didn't issue keys, and no supervisor confirmed he had access. Someone waved a paper in front of a reporter and called it a confession letter from Jake. It was a graduation card. Even so, a small number of details sharpened when people stopped performing their certainty. A teacher told a reporter years later, "We let the night end on its own. We thought she went home." A student who stacked chairs at 12:50 remembered a light flashing on the far end of the lot and then dropping again. A parent who waited in a van to pick up a freshman said she saw a man in a jacket cross toward Route 9 around 12:25 and vanish between the cypress. She didn't tell police because no one asked her, and she thought they'd already found the girl by the time she got home. Those are the moments an airtight first day of work is meant to catch. The argument rumor grew legs. It made good copy. It gave people a scene to replay with their own lines. It felt like progress to imagine a fight, a slap, a door swinging open. It wasn't progress. The new testimony arrived after friends talked to one another, not before. It copied phrases that traveled fast in hallways. It arrived without a clock and without a clean place on the map. If it happened, it happened. If it didn't, it still pushed minds toward a version of Jake that could fill an hour with intent. That's what pressure does to a file. The same pressure washed over Pastor Riggs. He became a symbol because he stood in front of a microphone every week. That made him a target for criticism and a vessel for protection. People assigned him motives the way they assign weather to a bad harvest. There was a conflict with Vanessa, therefore he must be involved. That logic solves tension. It doesn't solve cases. He stayed under the light because the town put him there, not because the evidence did. Eddie stayed where he started, in the lane of opportunity. He knew the lot. He knew the light. He knew who lingered outside to smoke, and where a person could pass unnoticed if they timed it with a flicker. The torn logbook page sealed his reputation as a man who profited from sloppy systems. Without a match on the hair or a print, the case didn't move. The town filled that inertia with suspicion and called it common sense. What should have happened instead? A clock should have been built before interviews, not after. A detective should have walked from hall to bar and time-stamped each light and turn on Jake's route. The maintenance ticket for the lot should have been pulled and plotted on a graph to show when the lamp failed and for how long. The phone log at 11:30 should have been cross-checked with the parents' bills in the first 48 hours. The entire third row should have been sealed with tape and lights until sunrise, and a careful search for keys and fibers should have run edge to edge. The guard roster should have been reconstructed with payroll, radio checks, and cigarette breaks mapped on a diagram. That work is simple, patient, and boring. It turns a question into a path. It didn't happen when it mattered. One witness quote holds, because it matches the case more than it shapes it. "We thought she went home," the teacher said. Not because anyone saw her go, but because that's what happens after dances. The assumption is an alibi the case didn't deserve. Another voice, apparent from the pickup lane, said, "I didn't know I was the last adult to see that side lot." She wasn't sure what she saw, only that she saw a shape in the time that went missing. Those two lines explain more than anger ever did. As the week ended, the file had 3 suspects and no anchor. Jake's motive looked like the easiest story to tell. Riggs's platform made him impossible to ignore. Eddie's access made him hard to clear. Each man drew fire. Each man found defenders. The case drew breath from that tension and lost focus because of it. Minutes went missing from timelines while tempers and reputations carried the load. The wrong weight was on the wrong parts of the puzzle. There was no trial in 1982. There wasn't enough to charge anyone. The town didn't accept that. It branded people anyway. Jake left in 1985 and took the label with him. Riggs stayed and lived under a cloud that never broke. Eddie kept working the Route 9 strip, careful and loud, and let people think what they wanted. The case cooled on paper and burned in memory. This isn't to say the suspicion was foolish. It's to say it was selective. It preferred men with roles to men with access. It chose character arcs over electrical logs. It chased words over minutes. The police weren't corrupt. They were rushed and young. They chased what the town demanded and missed what the scene offered. The 20-minute window behind the hall kept its secrets because no one forced it open when the frame was still soft. Years later, the hair on the handrail would do that work. DNA would do what interviews and hunches failed to do. But that's ahead. For now, Part 4 ends where the first week ended, with 3 names, a torn page, a corrupted tape, and a crowd that believed it knew more than it did. The story of suspects is the story of pressure. It tells you one detail refused to fit: the keys. They were gone from that night forward. If Vanessa had them, they weren't found on her route back to the hall. If someone else took them, there was no record of when or how. That single absence changed the shape of the scene. A locked vehicle with missing keys suggests skill, timing, or both. It also suggests the kind of person who knows how to move in a back lot without drawing eyes. Near the 3rd row railing, officers collected a single brown hair stuck to the metal handrail. It was sealed with the methods of 1982: paper envelope, tape, initials. That was considered careful then. It wasn't enough. The evidence room didn't have proper humidity control, and temperature swings ate into the integrity of old samples. The hair would survive, but weaker than it could have been. It waited in a box while the town argued about people. A faint shoe impression lay close to the Pontiac's lane. The photograph was flat, the lighting poor. No scale marker. The ridge pattern in the sole, the only thing that can tie a tread to a make, never made it into a report with confidence. With better photos, a lab might have said, "Men's athletic, size range 9 to 11, or work boot, lugged sole." With that photo, all anyone could say was, unclear. A backdoor camera existed over the exit Vanessa likely used around 12:10 a.m. Its tape was real, the storage plan was not. The cassette sat for weeks in a room with a fan and a window. The picture warped, the sound lilted. Frames that might have shown a figure stepping out or pausing under the light turned into smears. The tape was not digitized. No one pulled a fast copy in the first 24 hours. By the time a specialist tried to recover it, most of the motion data was gone. The 11:30 p.m. wall phone call was logged by the school as a 1 to 2 minute outgoing call. Manual system. Pencil tick marks on a sheet. It should have been matched to incoming records at Diane Cole's home, and then there was the torn page, the guard or lot log that should have covered midnight to half past. It went missing right where investigators needed it most, the silent window around 12:10 to 12:30 a.m. One supervisor said the page tore when a binder ring snagged. That excuse might be true. It also took away the chance to pin down who walked the back fence and who held a flashlight near row 3. "I remember a gap," a volunteer said years later. "We kept asking who was on patrol and no one could answer." Across the first 6 hours after the missing person call, the golden hours, the investigation did many standard things and missed the urgent ones. They cataloged the car correctly, but did not lock down the entire third row until dawn. They bagged the hair, but didn't refrigerate it. They took statements, but didn't isolate the key witnesses before stories bled into one another in the parking lot. They planned interviews for Monday instead of running a real-time drive test from the hall to the bar with a stopwatch on Sunday night. A teacher gave a line that still stings because it is honest. "We assumed she went home. We let the night end." That assumption moved the start line of urgency from 12:10 a.m. to the next day, and the case never caught up. Another parent who waited in the pickup lane remembered seeing a man in a dark jacket cross toward Route 9 near 12:25. She didn't call it in. "I thought the police had it," she said. Those are not failures of character, they are failures of structure. It's the system's job to ask the right questions fast, on record, before people go to sleep and memories start to reshape. When police did return to the lot with daylight, the ground was different. Bars had come and gone. A janitor's truck had rolled past row 3 because no one taped it off. Grass along the fence held new footprints. If keys ever hit that gravel, they had 12 hours to sink, get kicked, or ride off in a tire tread. A floodlight and a line search before sunrise might have worked. The town woke up instead to a half-secured scene. In the first week, a handful of decisions looked correct by policy but were wrong by timing. The hair was sealed but not cooled. The backdoor tape was stored but not copied. Interviewed. So why did the evidence go nowhere? Because each piece lost the one thing it needed most. The tape needed a stable room and a digital backup. It didn't get either. The hair needed cold, dry storage and later new science. It got a box on a shelf and a long wait. The shoe print needed contrast and scale. It got a flat flash. The keys needed a field search in darkness and a grid. They got daylight and a crowd. The call log needed a match. It got a shrug. Even the paperwork told a story that wasn't read. The torn log page, the exact half hour that mattered, never got a dedicated internal inquiry, never led to a roll-up of who held keys to the logbook cabinet, who signed in and out, whose handwriting came before and after the rip. In a stronger system, that page becomes a fire alarm. In 1982, it was chalked up to bad luck. By 1984, the file was not empty. It was tired. The evidence room held items that had potential, not power. The timelines had minutes missing and minutes misplaced. The town's pressure had pushed the work toward love and rumor and away from lights, logs, and the back fence. The science of the era couldn't help with the hair. You cannot charge a case on opinions and a blurred frame. The folder moved to the county cold case shelf. It stayed there while people whispered and pointed and aged. The long-term damage was real. The Cole family lived inside unending theories. 3 men carried labels in a town that didn't forget. Trust in the system thinned out. Every anniversary brought another article that reran the same few facts and the same few names. "We did what we could," an officer said later. It's true in one sense. In another, it misses the point. The case needed more than effort. It needed precision. There were opportunities to get it. Close the entire lane around the Pontiac until sunrise and search every inch with floodlights. Pull the maintenance records for the lot and build a simple graph of outages. Digitize the door tape inside a day and put it in cold storage. Run a stopwatch from the evidence did not fail this case. The handling did. The hours right after the call are where cases live or die. This one drifted. When it came back on the voice of science, not the strength of the first search. And that is where the story turns. Decades later, a clean room and a careful pipeline take that single hair and build a profile. A database returns relatives. A family tree gathers around a name. The case that had no bridge across the dark lot finally crosses. In the next part, we track the 4 decades between that night and the breakthrough. We follow the vigils, the rumors, the people who stayed, and the people who left. We show how a small town kept asking, and how a single sealed envelope made it to a lab bench in 2023. "I thought the police had it," the parent said. In the end, science did. The first months felt like a race that ran out of road. People in Willow Creek expected an arrest within a week. It didn't come. By the summer of 1982, the town spoke in lowered voices on Maple Drive and said the same thing with different words. This shouldn't happen here. In 1983, the paper ran 1 year missing over a hallway photo from the high school, and 3 names hardened into the town's everyday language. Jake because of jealousy, Pastor Riggs because of public arguments, Eddie because of his temper and his lot. In 1984, the file moved to County Cold Case. A short press conference. No new items. The tip line stayed open. The story slipped from the newsroom to the diner, and memory took over where evidence had stalled. From 1985 to 1989, people either left or learned to live under a cloud. Jake left in 85. That exit fed the rumor that he was running, and small bar fights in his new town kept the label alive from a distance. Pastor Riggs stayed, preached, visited shut-ins, organized food drives. Supporters called him a pillar. Critics called him controlling and kept their distance. Eddie kept hustling around Route 9. Fewer incidents, softer edges. Same suspicion. In the 2000s, the internet arrived and carried the case into basements and office breaks. Early forums scraped old clippings, stitched maps by hand, and made timelines with arrows and circles. New theories bloomed. A strange car on Route 9. An out-of-town guest who slipped into PROM. A timed light in the lot. The Coles braced against lies that climbed fast and never came down. The police posted the tip number now and then. The school put Vanessa's photo back up at the 20-year mark and started a small scholarship fund. Hope returned in short bursts and then thinned out again. Between 2010 and 2015, social media gave the case a new kind of oxygen. A Facebook group called Willow Creek Remembers, filled with prom photos from 1982. Graduates scanned programs, invitations, Polaroids. Someone posted a clear shot of the third row, the light blue Pontiac exactly where people remembered it. A crowd-made map marked the back door, the lot, Route 9, the church, the bar, Maple Drive. A local podcast, 4 short episodes, told the story plainly. The hair, the bad tape, the flickering lights. New listeners found the case. Old names returned to the comment threads. Frank Cole kept his daughter's bedroom as it was and told a reporter, "I'm not moving anything." From 2016 to 2019, national headlines about genetic genealogy changed expectations. Cases older than this one found names. Families in other towns found answers. Willow Creek watched and wondered if its moment would come. The county evidence room did an audit. The hair survived one purge after another. Money didn't. Clean room work and advanced extraction were expensive. A few benefit jars by registers helped, but not enough. The case needed a door. It had a window. In 2020 and 2021, the sheriff's office quietly stacked the file near the top of an internal memo about Northeast cold cases. They chose it because the victim was an emblem, because the sample still existed, because the town hadn't let go. Investigators reached out. By early 2023, funding covered one shot at one hair. The lab took the envelope, measured the damage, and said a partial profile might be possible. The profile, once built, would go into the state index and a partner genealogy platform under current legal standards. A specialist began with the outer branches of distant relatives and worked inward, layering geography, work history, and known schedules from 1982. A surname started to repeat in the tree: Monroe. A nickname began to surface in the notes: Hank. He worked near the lot. He worked at night. He wasn't on anyone's lips in 1982. The hair had more to say, and for the first time, someone could listen. While the science moved forward, the town kept its rituals. Frank lit candles each year and avoided television. "I want what's provable," he said. The family declined interviews that tried to make drama out of grief. They handed over photos and certificates so dates could be checked and faces matched without guesswork. They kept pressing for evidence, not legends. Reputation kept its slow spin around the 3 familiar names. Jake lived away and learned that every anniversary could still pull his name into a headline with nothing new underneath. Riggs' public work softened his image for many. Mistrust held in a smaller circle. Eddie aged into a quieter man with the same old torn page stuck to his name. The town didn't forget. It sorted, reshuffled, and told the story again in different houses. Why did Willow Creek hold on for 4 decades? Because the case became part of how the town understood itself. Prom night, 1982, turned into a marker people used to measure time. New residents heard it within months. Kids learned about it from older cousins. The story made people feel closer to truth, even when it handed them no proof. Science promised proof, but for years it belonged to other towns and other families. Each solved case elsewhere pulled hope up and then set it down. 2023 was different. The system finally reached them. A handful of artifacts bridged the years. The hair was there. When the sheriff's office reopened the file in spirit, if not by press release, they made one promise to themselves: no more illusion of a suspect. They would favor minutes over personalities, places over reputations. They assembled a matrix on a whiteboard, light outages, guard positions, flows in and out of the hall, paths to Route 9, and pinned every reliable data point that survived the years. Claims without sources moved to a side list. If we can't clock it or hold it, an investigator said, we don't build on it. The town didn't watch a lab do its work, it watched its own. People posted prom photos that had sat in boxes. A retired electrician brought in a notebook with service calls from the early 80s. A teacher found an old program with a printed schedule that helped set a song time in the VHS audio. None of it was glamorous. All of it was useful. The case could finally breathe without rumor choking it. 4 decades of rumors did not solve the case. They kept it alive long enough for something better to arrive. The same persistence that warped facts also preserved interest. When the lab called back with a workable profile, the file on the desk did not have to be built from scratch. It had a place to receive a name. The next turn is the one the town waited for. In a clean room, technicians separated what remained of a single hair and built an ancient-style profile from fragments. They compared it, uploaded it, and watched the relative matches appear. A tree took shape. A name rose to the top that no one in 1982 thought to say out loud. Before we go there, remember the balance that brought us to this threshold. Candlelight and comment threads kept the memory lit. Careful handling of old paper and old plastic kept the evidence real. One line from a parent explains the long gap between. I thought the police had it. For a long time, they didn't. Now, science did. Part 7 follows the DNA to its end point. We track the profile through the database. The branches. Inside the garage, they found a locked metal trunk. Inside, a work logbook, gate passes, a stack of pay slips, a small spiral notebook, and a box of faded photographs. One line in the notebook stood out. Gate 00:00, Lot Patrol. Below it, an arrow pointing toward the back lot of Willow Creek Hall. There were lists of cigarette breaks and repair calls. One entry, circled in pencil, read, Light out, short. First week, May. That matched the outage recorded in the town's maintenance sheet. The same short blackout window that lasted between 00:12 and 00:18 on prom night. A second box contained a camera and dozens of undeveloped film rolls. When processed, they showed women around town in the late 1970s and early 80s. Waitresses, joggers, churchgoers, all photographed from a distance. One image caught the back steps of Willow Creek Hall. The railing, the sodium lamp glowing weakly in the corner of the frame. The same handrail where Vanessa's hair had been found. The gloves and flashlight inside the trunk still held traces of skin cells. The pattern matched Hank's own preserved medical sample from his hospital records. His shift badge confirmed he had been on duty that night, patrolling the lot from 11:45 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. His route map included the rear gate, the same direction Vanessa was last seen heading toward. Forensic analysts laid everything side by side. The hair from 1982, the notebook marked Lot Patrol, and the maintenance report about the flickering lights. Together they formed a triangle no rumor could bend. The odds of a false match were practically zero. The DNA report was signed off with one sentence that ended 41 years of doubt. Source profile consistent with Monroe Henry L., deceased. When investigators reopened the other names that had haunted the town, the picture cleared quickly. Jake Mallory's bar receipt and phone record finally lined up. He was across town when the lights went out. Pastor Riggs had been home preparing a sermon. The time-stamped notes in his study matched the same window. Eddie Kramer's torn logbook, once suspicious. The DA explained the sequence. The dark window between 0010 and 0020, Hank's patrol notes, the matching hair. He emphasized that the file would close not by conviction, but by confirmation, a name proven beyond doubt. "We can't prosecute the dead," he said, "but we can tell the truth about the living." Apologies followed, to the Cole family, to the community, to the men who carried suspicion for decades. He thanked the Genetic Genealogy Lab, the state archives, and the volunteers who had submitted photos and maps. "Without them," he said, "this case would still be cold." The town's reaction came fast. Relief mixed with anger. Headlines read, "40 years, one hair." At the diner on Main Street, someone said, "We spent decades blaming the wrong people." Another answered, "At least we know now." Pastor Riggs called it, "the truth none of us wanted, but all of us needed." Jake Mallory's statement was short. "I never stopped waiting for this day." The local paper ran an editorial titled, "Stop Filling Silence with Rumor." It urged residents to let evidence, not gossip, define memory. At the high school, students replaced the old newspaper clippings on the hallway board with a timeline. Simple, factual, dated by minute and hour. Online, the true crime groups renamed their podcast episode, "The Name We Missed." The sheriff's office turned the lesson into policy. Every small department in the county received new guidelines. Refrigerate trace evidence. Digitize video within 24 hours. Separate witnesses in the first 2 hours. Preserve maintenance logs with case files. Training sessions taught officers how suspect illusion, the rush to assign guilt, had poisoned the original work in 1982. The Willow Creek file became a teaching case for how to keep data, not rumor, alive. In early autumn, the town held a candlelight vigil at the small park facing Willow Creek Hall. A bronze plaque was unveiled on the brick wall. Prom night. Never forgotten. Frank Cole spoke briefly, thanking the volunteers and the forensic team. He read the names of Jake, Riggs, and Eddie, asking the crowd to remember that they too were victims of the unknown. The high school announced the Vanessa Cole Scholarship for young women entering science and forensic study. Her old classmates gathered for a photo under the new banner. For the first time, there were no whispers about guilt. Still, some questions lingered. Inside Hank Monroe's box were photographs of other women no one could identify. Investigators opened a public line for tips. People from nearby counties began checking old files from 1978 to 1984 for similar disappearances. A pattern of short-lived light outages at local lots was noted, but never confirmed. The possibility that Hank's lot patrols hid other encounters remains open. Residents were encouraged to send in any remaining prom tickets, yearbooks, or journals from 1980 to 1983. Each new photo or note could help reconstruct the complete map of that night. Not because it would change the outcome, but because it might finish the picture. The county ended its final report with one line that summed up both tragedy and closure. One hair. One note. One broken light. And the name that connects them all. 41 years too late, Willow Creek finally knew who had been in the dark. The last paragraph of the official summary read, "The truth is verified. The offender is deceased. The victim's memory stands." For the Cole family, that was enough. Frank Cole told a reporter quietly afterward, "I wanted facts, not revenge. Now I have both peace and proof." The case closed, not with a trial, but with a full circle of acknowledgement, of failure, persistence, and precision. As the evening candles burned down, a light breeze carried through the park. On the plaque, the final inscription caught the glow. "Justice came late, but it came, and it still needs your eyes." The county's final notice is short and plain. Case status, solved. Offender deceased. It lists what carried the weight. A single hair collected in 1982 that profiles to Hank Monroe. A notebook line that reads, "Gate 00:00, Lot Patrol." A maintenance card showing a short light outage between 00:12 and 00:18 behind Willow Creek Hall. That is the core. That is why the file closes without charges. The suspect is dead, the proof is strong, and the record is complete enough to stand. The release includes a simple timeline from 00:10 to 00:20, a map of the lot, and the route to Route 9. It links a redacted report the public can read. A tip line stays open for cases in the same period, 1978 to 1984, in case this story reaches someone who still carries a piece of it. Then come the apologies. Law enforcement and the district attorney say what many waited to hear. "We are sorry for the delay in justice." They say it to the Cole family first. They also say it to Jake Mallory, Pastor Alan Riggs, and Eddie Kramer. Each will receive a formal exoneration letter. The county offers documentation if employers, schools, or lenders ever ask what happened. A town hall is scheduled, not to relive the fight, but to learn from it. How do you hold back when rumor runs? Local media reorganize the story. The newspaper runs a feature titled "From Rumor to Record." It prints before and after, the way a detail once lived as a whisper and now lives as a document. A regional podcast releases "The Name We Missed" and uploads the public files. Reporters receive new guidance. Avoid baiting speculation. Anchor to minutes, objects, and data. The Historical Society opens a small digital archive, copies of the VHS, scanned clippings, community maps with verified captions. Residents are invited to add photos and ticket stubs, but with context, dates, and places. Policy changes follow. All trace evidence now goes into cold storage by default. Any analog media is digitized within 24 hours. Key witnesses are interviewed separately within 2 hours of first contact. Maintenance logs for lighting and power are attached to case files in the first night. A short training on suspect illusion becomes part of basic instruction, the human need to fill gaps with a face. Police, school staff, church leaders, and lot managers hold a joint workshop to practice the first 72 hours the right way. The county launches a public case reader. It shows the timeline in minutes, the map, and photos of the handrail where the hair was collected. Names of private citizens are redacted. A downloadable data pack includes the parking plan, images of the rail, the light maintenance note, and a simplified DNA summary. Filmmakers and researchers can request higher resolution materials under a standard agreement. A correction channel allows anyone to flag an error with sources attached. The Cole family keeps their statement brief. "We wanted what's provable." They leave Vanessa's room intact, but agree to loan items for rotating displays. They allow the use of her photo for education and non-profit projects. Their message to students is clear. Trust the work. Trust the time. Trust the data. The town leans into healing. There is a memorial walk in spring and a statewide reading of cold case names in fall. The library adds a media literacy night for parents and teens. An anonymous Dropbox sits near the checkout desk for memories that need vetting. At the close of one meeting, if you lived in Willow Creek from 1980 to 1983 or attended prom, your material can still help. Photos of the back lot, the rail, the route to Route 9, tickets, notes, yearbook signatures that show times and places, receipts from bars or gas stations, guard logs or pay stubs from late shifts. Specific memories tied to a day and hour when lights flickered or a guard passed. Every item needs context: who, when, where, and how you know it. Submitting is simple. Start your message with info, day/month/year, location, how you know. Add attach with original resolution scans or photos if possible. Add contact with an email or phone number so the team can verify. The review group will reply with a case code. Anonymity can be requested when public postings occur. A public dashboard will show what comes in, how many items are usable, and what changes because of them. It will also track how fast tapes are digitized and how consistently trace evidence stays cold. The goal is not spectacle. The goal is proof and pace. This story also leads outward. 2 or 3 nearby cases from the same era may benefit from the same method. Minutes, objects, and data, not labels. If you have names, dates, or photos from neighboring counties, send them in the same INFO format. Accuracy first. Respect, always. In the end, Willow Creek did not heal because someone guessed right. It healed because a hair sample was stored, because a guard wrote down a line about a gate and a patrol, because a light that failed for 6 minutes left a mark in a file. Justice came late, but it came, and it still needs your eyes. If this series helped you see the case clearly, help it reach the next witness. Like this episode, subscribe to follow the next chapters, and share it with anyone who lived in Willow Creek in the early 80s. Drop your info comment below with your date, location, and what you have. Your one photo, your receipt, your note could be the next piece that turns rumor